Now, my interview, this is going to be great. You're going to like this. My interview with former Prime Minister of Great Britain, United Kingdom, Tony Blair, who's now the envoy in the Middle East talks on behalf of the UN, the EU, Russia, and us. We spent a lot of time talking about Bill Clinton, and I began by asking him what makes the former president, Bill Clinton, such a dominant politician even today.
I think he is the master of the trade, really. I mean, I think he's the single most extraordinarily apt and competent politician I've ever met. And that's not because he's simply good at communicating, good at the art of politics. It's because he's actually, and this is the thing I think people don't understand about him sufficiently, it's all anchored in what are, in fact, very strong and very well worked out convictions. You know, people sometimes see him as, you know, the great communicator, but that's, you know, he was just a good politician, as it were. He's not. He has got a core of beliefs that are very, very strong and that completely define where modern progressive politics has got to be if it's going to be successful.
How did he tie together, and how does he tie together this centrist leaning liberalism, if you will? Somehow he's positioned himself close to the center, but yet on the progressive side in a way that grabs the loyalty of working people, as we say in our country, working middle-class people.
Because he understands people. He's fascinated by people. He's curious about people. You know, I remember when he came to speak for me at the Labour Party conference some years back in Blackpool, right, which is a very sort of strange, in a way, old seaside town in the UK. And we were supposed to meet him after he'd spoken. And we found him eventually down in the local McDonald's, you know, holding court with all the people in Blackpool who happened to be in there, a bit surprised to see Bill Clinton suddenly amongst them. But, I mean, I wasn't there, but my people who went in to find him found him sitting there talking with these people, literally as if he was their local councillor and had been for many, many years. It was just an extraordinary thing. So, you see, he has got this ability, therefore, to feel where people are. But here is the thing that's very interesting about him. He's got modern progressive politics. He's got a framework that I sometimes describe in shorthand, in social terms, for what I would call the tough on law and order, pro-gay rights position. Right? In other words, he understands that our generation and younger, they don't have these old prejudices that, frankly, my dad used to have, and probably yours too, and all the rest of it. But they don't like people who beat up other people or misbehave or any of the rest of it. In other words, they want rules but not prejudices. And his ability to define that, and that's just an example, meant that he pitched the Democrats exactly where they needed to be.
So it's people that work hard and play by the rules.
Yeah, and it's born out of a complete understanding of the generation you lead.
Do you think that's because he comes from that background, sort of middle class, middle, not upper middle, sort of regular person? Yeah,
but also because I think he is genuinely interested in people. You know, and that's what a great politician, as a politician, is always somebody who's genuinely interested in what makes people tick. And sometimes it's a funny thing in politics. You meet politicians who are, you know, pretty successful and so on, but it's very much a game of calculation for them. And you sometimes, and this is particularly so in progressive politics, you come across politicians who love humanity in general, just don't like them in particular. You know, whereas the thing with...
That's what we said about Woodrow Wilson, I think. He didn't like anybody in particular.
But the thing with Bill Clinton is he actually likes them in particular too.
Let me ask you about his success among independents on the last political point. We have a new NBC poll that just came out the other night that showed that among Democrats, he's obviously very popular, but that's no surprise. But among independents, who are the hardest people to reach in America because they don't really trust politicians, he's up something like 4-1. He only has 1 in 6 independents who doesn't approve of him, which in today's environment, as you know, in a tough economy, is so rare.
Yeah, but you see, that's because his political position is dead centre. And it is a very modern political position. So the old left would have said the answer to our problems is big state.
Right.
Big government. He doesn't. He says, actually, we need to reinvent government, make it strategic, make it empowering. The old left would have said, look, we're with the unions. And business, they're kind of the people we have to deal with, but, you know, we deal with them at arm's length. He understands completely that for a modern progressive to win, you've got to have at least some part of business on your side. So he's got a set of positions that make people in the centre ground very comfortable with him. And they actually understand that he believes those positions. I mean, they're not tactical manoeuvres.
Yeah, by today's standards, it's almost uncanny how good he is. Let me ask you about his position today. It's hard to believe, but he's been out of office, not president, for 10 years now. He's now into his second successive president after him. And yet, the other day up in Northern Ireland, and we watched the people react to him. I mean, not to put them down, but Robinson and McGuinness were ignored. The local political leaders of that country, of that part of the world, ignored, while they all cheered Bill Clinton. What is that endurance about, do you think, after all these years? 10 years.
I think people like him. I actually think they like him. They feel comfortable with his personality. They actually think he's human, and they think he's approachable, and they think he's smart. And that's a pretty rare combination, never mind in politics, in any walk of life.
You called him a brick in your book. By the way, I really like this book because it's the only politician, you are, sir, who actually talks about being a politician, which is like you're not embarrassed by it. But you talked about when you fought for Northern Ireland peace, and you really deserve, obviously, the major credit for bringing together two communities up there, the nationalist and the loyalist communities, the Protestant and the Catholic. You brought them there. You said during all that you would call on President Clinton across the Atlantic and say, can you help me on this, can you help me on that, make this call. And you called him a brick. Now, I'm told that's an old public school expression, private school expression over here. What is a brick?
It means real solid help, support.
Do people still talk like that here?
I don't know. I think I must have lapsed into
but it
early 20th century.
He was helpful to you.
He was. The thing about him in the Northern Ireland context was that, you know, obviously, although he was very interested in Northern Ireland, it's not his political backyard, it was mine. But the great thing about him was that I used to call him and talk to him. You never had to explain the politics beyond about one sentence. The moment you gave him just the most general of context, he could go right to the nub of what the whole thing was about, work out why Jerry Adams might want to do this and David Trimble might want to do that. And it was almost uncanny, this ability just to understand the politics of the situation almost instantaneously and based on, you know, I mean, there he was sat thousands of miles away.
So let's talk about the toughest question. That's the problem you're facing now, is representing the quartet as part of these very difficult talks. Sometimes I get very optimistic because I look at Bibi Netanyahu, who grew up near where I grew up in Philadelphia, who seems to be a really good politician who has to keep a very tough coalition together with the Shas party, the religious parties, and yet he may want to be an historic figure. And how do you nuance that? How do you find your way with Mahmoud Abbas, obviously impatient with the Israeli decision to continue with the building of settlements? How do you keep this going now?
It's very frustrating right now because I believe, on the basis of many conversations with Prime Minister Netanyahu and, of course, with President Abbas, both leaders, both sides genuinely want to make this work. So if we could only get this negotiation moving along, I think it is a more real negotiation than any I can remember. In other words, I think that if they come to an agreement, both of them are capable of selling it to each side of this conflict. And, for Prime Minister Netanyahu particularly, he's come back to office after a long period of time out of office. When I sit with them, as I often do, one thing is absolutely clear. He didn't come back just to sit there at the Prime Minister's desk. He's done that before. He's come back to make a difference historically for his country. Likewise, Mahmoud Abbas is a man who actually pretty rarely in politics, he genuinely is prepared to walk away. Genuinely. In fact, sometimes the worry is he will just walk away. He's there because he wants to do this deal. So if we could only get over this difficult impasse at the moment over the settlement question, I think and genuinely believe we've got the best chance and best hope in a generation for peace.
Last question, the Clinton brand. Once again, it's at work here. You have Secretary of State Hillary Clinton at the table, representing the United States, really putting her head into this. You know, this is a frontline issue where she is really, having been a former senator from New York, a member of a big political family in the United States, she has a lot at stake here in the United States with the Jewish community, with people who care about Israel, and also people who really just want peace over there. How do you see her role, and how do you see the Clinton brand once again playing a role here?
Well, I think there's enormous respect for the brand, but I think there is actual respect for her personally, you know, quite apart from President Clinton. And that's because people think, you see, she went and she paid her dues as a senator. Right. Actually, people respected the campaign that she ran for the presidency. They respect enormously the fact that having lost it, she didn't gripe about it. She got behind President Obama and took on the role of being Secretary of State. And she is somebody who understands this issue. You know, she's been in and around it and lived with it.
Well, she knows the politics in America, too.
Totally. And she knows how, I think, she can make the politics between the Israeli and the Palestinian side work together and do it in a way that carries, which is important, carries American opinion with her.
So are you still optimistic?
I am still optimistic, but then I think I'm a born optimist.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Blair.
Thanks.
For your time.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Well, that interview with Prime Minister Tony Blair is part of a documentary we're working on about former President Bill Clinton in his role as an ex-president.